there it is. Leaves are coming down, which means the riding season is just about over. Not for me, I'll probably be riding for another 2 months or so, but I know this is around the time of year after Labor Day weekend, or if you're international around this time, that you start to winterize your ski. Now, there's a few things that you need to know about this, and there's a few myths that I want to bring up before we start getting into the actual winterizing of a jet ski here. But just to kind of break it down, these are the things we are going to need. We have our... Now we're going to be addressing the jet pump. I want to state right off the bat that this video is going to be the most proper way to do your winterizing. I know some people take shortcuts or they take a different way. I want to let you know this is the way I do it. If you want your ski to last the most amount of time, this is the way you will need to do it. There's going to be some exemptions, like the way that you flush your system, but I'll explain that in a few minutes. So the first thing I want to show you here is the jet pump grease that we are going to be addressing. Now, your jet pump is something that you should be taking care of at least once a year. I tend to do mine at the end of the year. So we're going to pop the jet pump off. That'll be towards the end. We're going to replace the grease. I also tend to put a little bit of gear oil in my jet pumps. And if you do this, you almost will never need to replace your jet pump. Rebuild, do the bearings, the shaft, anything like that. Most of the time, if you have a jet pump failure, it's because you had water intrusion that was never addressed and it just ate away at the bearings and such. If you do this, you most likely will never need to do that. Next is our oil change. Of course, you want to change the oil at the end of the year because used oil is corrosive. SeaDoos also have a fuel dilution thing that kind of goes on. I'm not sure why. I guess forged internals on some skis or just the way they operate. You tend to get some fuel contamination in your oil, so it's best to change your oil at the end of the year. Now, if you just change the oil prior, say you change your oil every 25 hours and now it's 26 hours, technically you can not have to worry about the oil. I play it safe anyway. It doesn't matter if I just changed the oil 2 hours ago, I will still change the oil at the end of the year. It does not take long for oil to get contaminated, and for how expensive these skis are and how complex and even expensive the engines are, I'm not willing to risk it over some $45 container of oil, of course the oil filters and things like that, but I tend to always replace at the end of the year regardless of how many hours I have on the machine. Next, we have our anti-corrosive lubricant. Of course, when we're finished here today, we're going to spray everything on the engine and jet pump with this stuff, and that'll just prevent corrosion and stuff like that when it's sitting, whether you're storing it outside or in a garage, does not matter. We also have our storage oil. I'll explain this. I do have a video on this, but I'm going to include it in this video as well because this is all going to be part of the winterizing process. Next, we have our RV antifreeze. Now, up until recently, the official process for winterizing your jet ski now is to run RV antifreeze through the exhaust system, which is open loop. Recently, they changed that to just spraying or shooting the exhaust system with compressed air to eject all of that water that built up. But I still tend to like this way instead. I don't know why SeaDoo went away with using the RV antifreeze. I have a feeling it's got to be something with environmental concerns. But the concern I have is it doesn't matter how much air you shoot through the exhaust system, there's always going to be water in there. In fact, I recommend you use the official new process of shooting air through the system and then pop your exhaust hose off to look in the water box, and you will see it is still filled almost to the brim with water. So, if you have to ask me, RV antifreeze is the way to go. Next, we have our storage stabilizer for the fuel system. Generally, what you want to do, and I'll explain this, is fill this in your tank and then completely fill the system to the top. You want to top off the tank. You do not want to store your ski with a half tank or anything, but I won't get into that too much yet. I'll explain that when we get there. And then next we have our battery tender. Now, the best practice is to remove the battery and take it inside to charge. Some people tend to just leave the ski with the battery attached and they'll run a charge or whatever, but again, I will get to that in just a minute. The first thing I want to do before we get into the process is address some of the myths or things that people have kind of mentioned on the forums that come up a lot, because I feel like that's going to be kind of important to state here. Is the first one is running the ski occasionally over the course of winter instead of doing all of the winterizing process. And I want to say right off the bat, that's not a very smart idea. So basically what people say is, well, you know, if you store your ski in the garage or whatever, just run it, start it once a month or so just to get the system up and running, let it breathe. And that's not a very good idea. One is because cold starts are that's when, you know, your engine's going to undergo the most wear. These engines, although they can handle cold weather, they were not designed for that. The oil viscosity that they use is not meant for cold weather. It's going to take quite some time for you to build oil pressure. And of course, the longer the ski sits, the less oil there is readily available displaced all over the engine. So you are going to amplify the amount of wear in your system if you do it that way. And the other concern with running it occasionally over the course of winter is that you're never actually getting the engine up to temperature. So all of the condensation and stuff that forms inside the oil system is just going to accumulate, and the oil will take it on and it'll never evaporate because you're never getting the oil hot enough to burn it off. The second is fogging oil. Now, I don't know why, but fogging your engine is, for some reason, so many people say it's not needed or it's not worth it, whatever. Guys, the fogging oil is cheap. This can cost about $5, $10, whatever, and it'll last you realistically until you decide to get rid of your ski someday. Now, people will say all the time that, well, I haven't done fogging oil on my ski for 5-10 years and I've never had any problems. Sure, but you can, the example I always use is you can smoke a pack a day for 15-20 years and not die. That doesn't mean you're not healthy, or it doesn't mean you are healthy. You're certainly, if you don't fog your engine, you are definitely not going to have a healthy engine compared to a ski that has been properly stored. Basically, when you fog your engine, you're giving a very, very thick oil coating on the components that you're spraying. So the combustion chamber, you have your piston top, cylinder walls, and valves. Over time, when you just have your regular oil, that oil coating will slip off the walls, the valves, whatever, the cam, all that good stuff, and it leaves them exposed, and that's where corrosion can set in. So if you've ever worked on an engine that sat for a while, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You'll see those rust spots, the pitting, things like that happen, and that's just because fogging oil was not used. The next myth is that you don't need to use RV antifreeze or blow out the exhaust system because SeaDoos are closed loop. Yes, to an extent they are closed loop, but that is only the engine. The exhaust system is still open loop. So there's dozens of feet of cooling hose. You have your intercooler if you're supercharged, you have your water box, your exhaust manifold. All of those components will retain water just from use. And if you don't properly flush the system, any one of those parts can freeze, they can expand, they can crack. The intercooler is a common failure point. If you ever had a cracked intercooler because you didn't winterize, you know exactly what I'm talking about. RV antifreeze, again, is dirt cheap. You can pick it up for a few bucks. There's no reason not to do it. The next one is, well, I keep my ski in the garage. It's a heated garage, so therefore I do not need to winterize it. Again, that's, if anything, the only thing you can exempt your stuff from is the RV antifreeze. But everything else does not care about temperature. Storage oil, fogging oil, does not care whether the engine is hot or cold. Your oil does not care if the engine is hot or cold. Your fuel system, fuel will degrade. That does not care if it's hot or cold. Same thing with your jet pump. If you have water sitting in the jet pump for the course of winter, it does not care if it's warm or cold. So just because you keep your ski in a heated garage does not mean you can exempt yourself from properly storing it. Again, there's people out there that just don't winterize at all. They run them for a few years, they see no problems or whatever, and they think, winterizing is not really needed. This video is if you want to properly store your machine, you plan on keeping it long term, or you want to guarantee that you are doing the best that you can to maintain it and make sure it lasts you a very, very long time. Working on these skis just about every day, I can tell you with 100% certainty. It is very apparent who winterizes and takes care of their ski and who does not. And it's almost a guarantee that if you do not properly maintain your stuff, it is going to cost you significantly more in the long run. So those are the concerns that I wanted to address right off the bat. And of course, now we can get back into the actual process. The very first thing I want to show you is how to add the fuel additive. Now, like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm not actually going to be storing my skis yet. I will be doing the winterizing process just for this video, but I'm still going to be riding for another month or two. So I'm not going to fill the fuel tank, but I want to show you how that process works. Alright, so for this part, I'm going to be using Stable Storage Fuel Stabilizer. There is a bunch of fuel stabilizers that you can use. I get this stuff in bulk, so this is the stuff that I use. I believe SeaDoo also has one that they offer, but realistically, any kind of fuel stabilizer is going to be beneficial for you. Every single one has a different chemistry, so you'll have to check to see how much you need to use. You definitely do not put this entire thing in, but you can see on here, I'll read it because I know GoPro does not pick it up, but 1 ounce of this will treat up to 2.5 gallons. This is a 15-gallon tank, so I'm going to put about 7 ounces in. So we have our ounce counter on here. We can see this is already pre-filled to 1 ounce, so I'm going to fill this up 7 times and pour it into the gas tank. Alright, and that's all for the fuel system. Now again, you want to fill the system completely up with fuel. I know a lot of people think that you can just completely drain the fuel system or just leave it at half a tank or so and it'll be perfectly fine. The reason you want to fill the fuel system up is because fuel does not corrode metal exhaust components. So if you leave some air in the system, the metal parts can be exposed to that air. That air has humidity in it, so the fuel, the humidity in the air will condense on those metal surfaces and corrode it over time. So it's best practice to add the stabilizer, then head to the gas station and fill your tank up. That way it kind of mixes the stabilizer in, but you're also dispelling that amount of air that's in the tank and you're not leaving any room for water to condense on any of those surfaces. Alright, our next step here is to pump RV antifreeze through the system. Now keep in mind you want to use RV and marine antifreeze. This is not standard coolant that you would pump through a car. It's very, very different. So basically we're going to pump this system, or pump this fluid through the exhaust system. That's going to hit the intercooler. This is a SeaDoo GTR 230, so it is supercharged. And this is going to make it through the cooling loop. It's going to make it through the manifold, into the intercooler, in through all the cooling passages, the hoses that are in there, and of course the water box as well. Now it's not going to be a problem that we don't get all of the stuff out. That is perfectly fine. We can leave this stuff in there. The difference is this stuff will not freeze and expand. It will kind of gel up and make it like a slushy at worst, but it's not going to freeze. So the biggest concern, of course, on the supercharged skis is water in that intercooler. The intercooler has a very, very, very fine, it's almost like a radiator on a car. It's air water intercooler, and if you have water in any one of those very, very small passages over the course of winter, they will freeze and expand and crack. So when you ride your ski in the summer, all of that, the separation that you normally have with the air and water is no longer the case. You're going to have split channels. Water will make it into the air side of the intercooler and of course get sucked into your engine. It happens very, very often. I think I've probably replaced 16 or 17 intercoolers at the start of this year that were due to freezing and cracking over the course of winter. So to do this, I have this contraption here. It's just a simple hand pump, fluid transfer pump. So it's going to suck out from the 1 gallon tank here, and as I pump it, it's going to push it through the exhaust system. Now we need to run the ski for this to work. We cannot just pump this in with the ski off. It's very similar to running the ski on the hose. You do not want to run water or any kind of fluid through the flush port when the engine is not running, or else you can back feed that into the engine. So I'm going to go ahead and stage the camera where I can turn the ski on, and then we'll pump this fluid in. Alright, we just pumped the entire gallon, so we can go ahead and shut the ski off. The next step is the oil change. So of course we're going to go ahead and remove the top deck to get access to the oil filter. Alright, I just started the extraction process, of course using the dipstick and the extraction method. I'm using my manual extraction tank. I sometimes will use the electric one, which just connects to the battery on the SeaDoo. But in this case, it's kind of cold out, the oil is thicker, so the electric pump would take a very long time. This way, I'm just using my manual pump, which I just kind of refill the suction every once in a while on, and I just kind of let that go. The other benefit with this is that it's quiet, so if I'm talking to someone or doing something else, I don't have the electric pump running in the background, but sometimes the electric pump is a little bit faster. So while that's running, I'm going to go ahead and change the oil filter. Oil filter is very easy to use or to do. I recommend staying with a OEM oil filter. There's plenty of knockoffs on Amazon, and trust me, they are not the same quality. They will collapse on you. So stick with an OEM filter. We are also going to be replacing the 2 oil filter gaskets or O-rings. We have a bigger one and a smaller one. I'll show you where those go. I'm also going to use a pick to get these O-rings off, and then of course we have our E10 bit, which is going to fit on top of the oil filter housing. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this off, and I'll show you how to process or how to replace the filter. Alright, I'm just going to let this drain in the housing for a few seconds. Okay, with the oil filter removed, it's best to give it a visual inspection. Just make sure you don't have any oil shavings, or sorry, metal shavings or anything like that. Make sure it's not collapsed in on itself. Make sure there's no water. This is a perfect looking filter. I replaced this at the end of last year, and I also replaced it mid-season this year. So this is a very healthy oil filter, and that gives us a good indication that the engine is running perfectly fine. So to remove the filter, all we need to do is kind of move it to the side, just like that. The filter will lift out. I'm going to go ahead and put this in the box. Let the new one came in, and then we'll go ahead and drop in the new one. And then you don't have to do this. I tend to do it just because that's how it's done at the factory, but you just want to press the filter into the housing top. That way it stays attached. And of course you can see our 2 O-rings here. And they are very simple. We just need to use our pick to get underneath and pull them out just like that. That's our big one. And then we have this one here. Now I want to give an indication. When you put this filter housing back in, this gasket here, this O-ring, will be compressed in the housing that the oil filter goes into, but this top O-ring will be exposed. So when you're bolting this thing back in and you see this top piece, that is perfectly normal. This O-ring does not go into the housing. That will always be exposed. Don't ask me why they do it that way. I have no idea, but it confuses a lot of people. And then the other thing I want to point out is that there is also an O-ring under this bolt here. We tend not to replace that until it starts to leak. These bottom ones, you want to replace them every single time, but this one that's under this bolt, you really only need to replace it if you start to see oil leaking out of here when your ski is running. So I'm going to go ahead and put the new O-rings on. Alright, so I'm going to put the skinny one on first. That's this guy. I highly recommend getting some oil on it first, so you can just put your hand in the oil filter housing to get some oil on there. That way it doesn't go on dry. Feed this down. Go ahead and rest that on the bottom. And there's not really a groove for this one. It just kind of sits there. And then we'll get our next one, the thicker one. And same thing, we want to get some oil on there. Okay, and then we can go ahead, and that does have a groove that it sits in, so we'll just drop that in place. Okay, so this is good to go. We go ahead and drop it back into the filter housing and then bolt it back into place. Alright guys, once you start to hear that, sounds like air bubbles, that means there is nothing left in the main chamber for the oil. So the next step is to basically remove our extraction tube. I'm just going to rest it slightly in there. We just want to make sure it's not in the bottom where the crank is. And then we are going to crank the ski over in drown mode. Remember, this is a dry sump oil system. It's not a wet sump like a car. There's no main reservoir at the bottom. There's multiple reservoirs all throughout the engine. So when we can no longer extract more oil, there's still plenty of oil all over the engine, so we need to crank it in drown mode to pump more oil into that bottom reservoir. And you can see here, I do this so many times that I have a mark on this pump when I know that's the amount of oil that should be coming out, and we are quite a bit below it. So there's still plenty of oil in this engine that we need to get out. So the process is very simple. All we need to do is crank the ski, but we are going to hold the throttle all the way in as we're cranking, and it won't send any fuel to the injectors. It's not going to ignite the spark plugs. It's only going to crank the engine. So we'll do that just a few seconds to build up some oil pressure and pump the oil back into the engine. Alright, and you can see after we did that little drown mode, there's still plenty of oil coming out now. So you're most likely going to have to do this anywhere from 3 to 5 times. Basically, you just want to keep on doing it until whenever you pump it up, it immediately goes to bubbles. That means there's pretty much nothing left in the system. Remember, you do not want to start the ski when you have the oil out. You want to crank it in drown mode. And if you don't do this process, you're leaving a significant amount of bad old oil in the system. You're never going to get most of it out. It's impossible to completely drain the engine just because of the way it's configured, but following this process we'll get a majority of it out. Just an update, so I've done 2 drown modes now, and you can see just how much more oil we've gotten out so far, and we're still going. So I have a feeling I'll be doing that probably 4 times. Alright, now that we have all of the oil extracted, what I'm going to do is go ahead and take this to go dump it into a oil catch that I have, and then I'm going to pour the new oil into this fill line. So I have this just under 3.5. Most people do 3.5, but you should be getting about 3.5 quarts, liters, whatever this is, liters out. And that's what you want to put back in. So I just want to give you a heads up. Most people will say, well, just put back whatever you take out. Sure, that's correct, but only if the amount that you take out is correct. If your engine is overfilled and you take it out and you re-overfill it, it's not going to help you. And of course, if your engine is underfilled and you end up putting a low amount of oil back in, that's also not going to be a good situation. So just keep in mind, you should be getting about 3.5 liters of oil out, and that's what we're going to put back in. So I'm going to go drain this, and then I'm going to put the fresh oil back into this container. And then one video I made where I showed you the oil change process, someone made a comment that, well, why are you putting clean oil back into a dirty tank? And I just want to say, you're never going to get all of the oil out of the engine. There's always going to be about a liter or so left of old oil. So the few drips of bad oil or old oil at the bottom of the container that I put in with fresh oil is literally not going to matter in the slightest bit. So I just wanted to point that out. So let me go ahead and do that now. For this fill, I'm going to be using Liqui Moly 10W40 PWC oil. You can of course use XPS or any other oil that you prefer to use. Generally, I use Liqui Moly. I did a Blackstone Oil Labs test a few years ago, back in 2020. Compared this with Rotella T6 and XPS oil, and both Rotella T6 and Liqui Moly exceeded quite substantially over XPS oil. This just kind of took the lead slightly over Rotella T6 because it is formulated specifically for PWC, so it had more corrosion inhibitors. But I'm not saying which oil is best for you. If you're running a SeaDoo, as long as you have a JISO MA2 certification, API SP, or SN, I think they also accept, I'll have to double check that, you will be good to go. But Liqui Moly is the oil that I use, so this is the fill we're going to use today. With the oil done, now we can move on to the fogging part. Now, I forgot to mention earlier, but I will be changing the spark plugs as well. I tend to do my spark plugs at the end of the year, regardless of hours. I know SeaDoo basically says 100 hours, 200 hours, or more, depending on your year model, whether it's supercharged or not. But I tend to just replace them at the end of the year to be safe. So that is going to go in line with fogging the cylinders, since we need to remove the spark plugs anyway. Now I take it a step further and I remove the fuel rail and injectors and spray through the injector holes as well with the fogging oil. And the reason I do that is because the back of the valves are not sprayed with fogging oil. They're basically not getting any benefit of the fogging oil, which, you know, in this case can be kind of an issue because the intake side, as well as the exhaust, but the exhaust, you know, will get the expulsion of fogging oil, is also exposed to condensation. When you have a compressed air situation like you do in this case, you're force feeding air, you're compressing air, that leads to condensation, and that sitting on the back of the intake valves can lead to premature rusting, failure, pitting, things like that, and could just lead to all kinds of problems. So the spraying of the backside of the intake valves is not something you're going to see in the service manual, just because it is kind of taking things a step further. But again, I like to do it. I've never had any problems with pitting or any valve issues on any of my SeaDoos or any of the SeaDoos that I work on, because I do follow this process. But whether you choose to do that or not is up to you. So the part we're going to fog with removing the spark plugs and spraying it into the combustion chamber, that part is absolutely required. The part where I'm going to remove the valves and spray fogging oil, that's optional. If you want to do it, just follow the steps that I do. If not, you can just ignore that. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and remove the 3 coil packs with the T30 bolt that's holding them into the valve cover. The SeaDoo spark plugs are the 5/8 size, so I'm going to go ahead and remove these spark plugs. Once we have the spark plugs out, all we need to do is take our storage oil and then spray it into each of the spark plug holes. Once we have the fluid in, we can go ahead and crank the ski over in drown mode again, and that's just going to kind of spread that oil all throughout the combustion chamber. Alright, that's all. Now we can go ahead and put in our new spark plugs. Alright, once the spark plugs are in, we can go ahead and reattach the coil packs. Alright guys, again, this part is completely optional. You certainly do not need to do this. Again, this is just because I like to do as much as I can for long-term protection and reliability. So I'm going to remove the fuel rail on here. There's only 2 bolts that are holding it in. It is 2 E8 bolts, and then the fuel rail will simply pop out this way. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, now that we have that off, we can go ahead and pull the fuel rail out. Now we want to do this carefully and slowly because there are some O-rings on the injectors. We do not want the injectors to pop out because it's going to spew fuel everywhere. So just do it slowly. Don't just yank on it once. And we don't need to come out very far. We just basically need to get enough room to be able to spray fogging oil through the open injector ports. Alright, and that's basically as far as it needs to go. I can see perfectly into the holes. I'm not sure how well that's coming out on the GoPro, but you can definitely see through the injector ports to the back of the intake valves. So I'm going to go ahead and take our fogging oil and spray in there as well. Alright, and that's it. All we need to do now is line up the fuel rail and slowly push the injectors back into their ports. Again, you want to do this very slow because you do not want to pinch those O-rings. Okay, and then we just need to put our bolts back in. So we are getting very close to being finished. The next part is to winterize the jet pump. Again, you do not really need to do this if you don't want to. You should. That pump grease does get exposed to water. There's only 2 O-rings that are holding that cone on, and with the force of water and everything, you will get water in your jet pump. Some people go years without doing any kind of maintenance on them, but eventually that water will cause damage to the bearing and you will need to get your jet pump rebuilt. So if you want to prolong that to the point where you may realistically never need to repair or replace your jet pump, you definitely want to do what I'm about to show you. And the easiest way to do that is to put your jet pump or your IBR gate all the way down using the IBR override, so we can start removing some parts on here. Now this is a GTR 230, it's a 2020. This one we can put the gate down in IBR override mode. If you have a older jet ski, the process may be slightly different. If you have a SeaDoo Spark, the process will be different. But if you have a 2020 and up full-size ski, whether it's a GTR, RX, PX, GTX, RXT, whatever, this process will be identical. So we're going to put the IBR gate into IBR override mode, which is very simple. All we need to do is hold the brake all the way in. We're going to press the wake button. Wait a second for it. It will ask if we want to go into IBR override mode. Go ahead and click mode to confirm that. And then we're just going to hold the trim button down. And then once it stops, let go of both the trim down and the brake, and that will lock it into IBR full down. So if we go back down here, you'll see that the gate is all the way down. So what we're going to do here is we are just going to remove the reverse gate, and we're going to remove the steering assembly as well as the venturi. We're not going to remove the jet pump. You certainly can if you want to. I'm not, because I just did some jet pump work on here recently, so it's just going to be easier if I do it in place. So most of this can be done, actually all of this can be done with a single 10mm for your steering, and then a 13mm socket, which is going to be how we're going to remove the bucket, the steering assembly, the reverse actuator, and of course the venturi, which also has 4 13mm holding it in. So let's go ahead and get started. First two bolts to remove are the 10mm for our steering and the 13mm holding our reverse actuator onto the bucket. Once we have those two off, we can go ahead and remove the two 13mm that are holding the steering assembly in. There's one on either side. With that steering out of the way, we can of course now just remove the bucket, which again is only held in with two 13mm bolts. With everything out of the way, now we can remove the venturi, and again 4 13mm bolts, and this will come right off. With the venturi off, you can see what we were trying to get access to, and that is the tail cone on the jet pump. There is 3 T30 bolts that are holding that into place, and then this cone will just pop right off. Alright, let's pull the cone off, and yeah. So I actually serviced this pump at the beginning of the year because I was doing a wear ring replacement after a rock ingestion. So I still have a decent amount of good grease in here. You can see that gray, that there is a tiny bit of water contamination, so it's a good thing we are doing this. But all I'm going to do is go ahead and scoop out this grease here. I'm going to put some new grease in, and I'm also going to put a little bit amount of 75-90 gear oil into the cone here just before I push it back onto the jet pump. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and put the cone back on with the oil inside, and we're good to go there. So I'm going to go ahead and put on our T30s. Alright, so putting this all back together is basically just the reverse of what it is, so I'm not going to get everything on video just because I'm not sure how long this video is, but it's already quite long. So we're going to put on our venturi, we'll get those 4 bolts on, then we'll go ahead and get our bucket in place, then we will get the steering in place, and then of course the last 2 bolts will be our reverse actuator and our steering. So I'm going to knock that out real quick. Pump and everything back here is put back together, so we are good to go on that front. The next order of business is to spray everything with anti-corrosion spray. So we are going to be using the XPS anti-corrosion. Now I mentioned in the previous video that you can use pretty much any kind of anti-corrosion spray there is. There's CRC, there's Corrosion X, even WD-40 does have a corrosion inhibiting spray, not standard WD-40. There's dozens of anti-corrosion sprays out there that you can use. I only use this because I got a bulk deal a few years ago. And we are just going to spray everything on this engine, as well as the jet pump. And now you can see this ski has well over 100 hours. It is a 5-year-old ski. It does ride in salt, and there is not a single point of corrosion on this engine. Now, it looks a little funky in spots. That is just a very heavy anti-corrosion layer that I spray onto the ski. You can see that if I wipe this off, everything on here is very, very nice. There is no corrosion on any of the bolts, on any of the hose clamps, or anything in here, and that is simply because I use anti-corrosion spray. Now, this is really, really going to help you out. I made a video in the past, I think, or maybe I didn't, where a ski sank because one of the hose clamps failed. And the hose clamp failed because it was rusted. It got corroded out. The guy was riding salt for about 2 years and never really used any kind of anti-corrosion or anything in his ski. So it was actually this hose clamp here failed. This boot shot off, and the ski was filling with water, and led to, you know, all kinds of problems. So all we need to do is take this and quite literally spray everything in here. There's not a spot that you cannot hit, aside from the carbon seal down there, the stainless steel hat. The carbon seal and the stainless hat need to have a dry contact. They need to contact each other. There cannot be any oil or any other fluid. So we'll go ahead and spray everything in here. This is intercooled, so we want to get the intercooler in the back. Of course, another spot is just down into this cavity right here, so we want to spray there. Basically everything in here, and then of course we can do the jet pump as well. Just spray everything in here. Same thing, steering linkages, any of the bolts, any mechanical parts, the steering components, things like that. And that's going to give us a very, very clean contact surface area that'll prevent any kind of corrosion or rusting over winter. So that's it for that. And that is pretty much it. The only other thing we need to do is address how we are going to maintain our battery over the course of winter. Now, this ski will be kept in my garage. It's not a temperature controlled garage, but it is certainly isolated from the elements. I do have a diesel heater in there, so it stays somewhat warm. So I am going to keep the battery in here, and we want to use a battery maintainer or tender, not a charger. There's a very big difference. A charger will charge the battery until it's full, and that's it. It's not going to do anything else with it. A maintainer slash tender will charge the battery up to a certain point, self-drain it, pull some power out of it, reapply, and it's basically just keeping the battery active. Remember, an idle battery is a battery that dies. So a active battery, one that you are pulling and giving a charge to, is a battery that's going to last. I generally use the NOCO batteries. I have a 1 amp, 2 amp, 5 amp. I have a 4 bank NOCO charger. So this is one where I'll be able to keep this battery. Now, this is a NOCO lithium battery, so it's a little bit different from the standard AGM. Realistically, I could just keep this battery as is, and it'll start exactly like it is right now. 8 months from now or so, when we start back in spring. But even then, I tend to put a battery tender on my lithium batteries as well, because these ones do have a lithium mode. So whether you keep your battery in your ski or not is up to you. If you live in a very, very cold climate, I highly recommend removing your battery and bringing it inside to put on a tender, somewhere where it's going to be warmer. You know, if you're in the negatives, these batteries do not like to be active when it's very cold out. So keep that in mind. You may need to remove your battery. I'd argue most people here in North America, at least north of kind of where I am, that's probably what you should be doing. So other than that, that is pretty much it for winterizing. The only thing I can say, guys, is if you find yourself asking, do I really need to, then you probably should. There's a lot of people out there that are giving bad advice, saying you don't need to do anything, or you can skimp out on this, this, and this. And they'll argue, well, you know, I had my ski for 2 years now and never had a problem. Again, it goes back to that example I gave at the beginning, where just because your ski does not fail on you does not mean that it's healthy. It's, you know, there's things that can prematurely fail, or you may skimp on maintenance and go 5+ years and never have a single problem. But you know, for how cheap it is and how easy it is to winterize, to me it's not worth taking that chance. Of course, there's additional things that you can do as well. Some people like to replace their wear rings annually. Some people will go even further and do they'll replace their coolant annually. I think that's a little overkill. I tend to stick to every 4 or 5 years. If there's anything else that you guys do, please let me know in the comments. I've been following this process on all of my skis throughout the years, and I do the same process when I winterize customer skis, and nobody has ever come back with any kind of problems. In fact, same thing with the jet pump. Adding the gear oil and doing annual jet pump service, I've never had to rebuild someone's jet pump prematurely. The only jet pumps I need to rebuild are ones that aren't, you know, serviced annually, or they don't use the gear oil blend, and those rebuilds can be pretty pricey. You know, the shaft and the bearing alone are almost $200, but you need to have a hydraulic press to get things out. You have to put new seals in, and it's just a whole world of pain and problems that you can avoid just by doing some annual service to your jet pump. But yeah, that's pretty much it. If you guys have any questions about anything I did here, of course, leave a comment in the description or in the comment section, and I will be happy to get back to you. If for anybody that wants to know the tools and stuff that I use, the chemicals, whatever, of course, I will have that stuff listed in the description as I usually do. But that's it for this one.